subtracting it on my app.
Yeah, it was needed.
That's the one.
No time to get a haircut either.
I wasn't sure what I was looking at.
Very sure, happy,
Big boat.
Oh, good, yeah.
they're over the top, it's just the whole family is just ecstatic, so.
But to have that kind of money.
Yeah.
It's funny,
Another
Yeah.
life,
I
a
was
whole
trying to
different
do-
world.
telling Simone about it before she left.
No, I have my friend comes in, he
Like
has
that.
super, yeah, actually, it's not that big, oh, it's giant. But, I've been seeing it.
It turns out she knows her already. It's like, yeah.
Oh, good,
Yeah.
I thought you were gonna say
In a
that they
good
were
way.
like this or something.
No, but still, I'm like,
no,
oh no,
I
like,
see.
we should go together.
Oh,
This
it's
is
just gonna be like
my
a
house gonna be a
chicken
party house.
Well, maybe you got yours, but yours.
Yeah, I've been very close.
Is Councilor Lumley away or?
Yeah.
Okay, let's eat the smart sweets.
It's owned by Giorgio Paulo.
It is one of yours. There's something in the big email that it's in the newspaper or something.
Google Photos.
Welcome to the Special Committee of the Whole meeting of the Town of Gibsons for July 25th, 2023. I'm calling it to order at 3 p.m. and we are honored to gather on the traditional territories of the Skokomish Nation. First, we need to approve the agenda. I am proposing one change, and that's to do the quarterly reports, to do planning and development services first, because I see we have some staff members here in the audience. Don't need to keep them waiting. Moved by Councillor Kroll, seconded by Councillor Thompson. All those in favor? The motion's carried. So our first item is a delegation from the Sunshine Coast Regional District's Manager of Solid Waste Services, Mark. So you can come and join us up here.
Yeah, hello, and thank you for the opportunity to present to you guys today about our solid waste management plan update. So I am Mark Soll, the Manager of Solid Waste Services at the SCRD. Still fairly new to the job and getting used to things, having started in November. But part of the first thing I did was kick off the engagement process for our solid waste management plan update. So solid waste management plans are a provincially required plan that regional districts have to develop in the province, and the expectation is that these are updated every 10 years. Our last plan is from 2011, so we're a little bit behind, but we have a few big challenges with solid waste in the next 10 years that this plan will hopefully address. So quickly just going over the current system we have here. We've got municipally managed curbside services, and then we have the SCRD's regional waste services such as the Seashell Landfill, Pender Harbour Transfer Station. We have Recycle BC collection through private depots on the coast, and we also have a yard waste operation. So here's a overview. I'm sure everyone's familiar, but we've got kind of three clusters of population along the coast within about an hour and a half or so drive on the southern portion of the SCRD. The SCRD also has a number of waste reduction programs, such as rebates for home composting, the Waste Reduction Initiatives program, which has recently kind of wrapped up, and we'll be having a report to our board summarizing the impact of that program from this year's activities. Later this summer, we'll also be doing the Backroad Trash Baths, and we run some annual programs such as the Good Samaritan program, which allows people to clean up illegal dump sites year-round and dispose of that material at the Seashell Landfill. And happening right now is our Islands Cleanup program. Just last Saturday, we had our big day cleaning up Keats. And there'll be one more event in early August before that wraps up. So we also provide brook recycling, and we manage the WildSafe BC program through a coordinator on the coast to help with reducing human and wildlife conflict. We also do a number of other education and outreach things at events and through social media. So here's kind of an overview of the last 10 years or so of the plan. You can see that our tonnage has gone up slightly, but what we have been able to do is increase our diversion tonnage by a fair amount over the last 10 years. So we have some challenges, some of which I'm sure you're all familiar with. We have low population density outside the municipalities, which makes service delivery difficult. We're a ferry access community. The economies of scale with a low population are a challenge, especially attracting contractors from off-coast. We have differing levels of service across the region, such as lack of curbside in electoral area A, as well as different curbside programs across the coast between the different municipalities in the SCRD. As I'm sure you're also experiencing here, but a lot of our operational and contract costs have increased exponentially over the last year. And our big challenge is that the Seashell Landfill is nearing capacity. So on that topic, the landfill is currently expected to close by mid-2025. Our engineer does say we may get into early 2026 now, but currently our liability letter has mid-2025. This site is the only solid waste disposal option in the 2011 plan. However, in 2023, we received provincial approval to amend that plan to add waste export. And the reason for that amendment is that if we reach capacity of the landfill before we've completed this solid waste management plan update, we have the option to export waste off coast and don't run into an issue where our plan says one thing, but we need to do another while we figure out a long-term option. And as mentioned there, we are looking at ways of extending the landfill life. At the 2024 budgeting process that the SCRD is getting into, there will be a relocation project for our contact water pond, which may get us landfill life up to 2030. And we're working on a number of other expansion options with Shishel Nation currently. And these are with them for review, and hopefully something comes of those because that's probably our best option here. As I'm sure you can imagine, exporting waste off coast, usually either to Washington State or Cache Creek, is very expensive, and it would be a huge adjustment for the coast if we did change our system to an exportation model. So some highlights from the 2011 plan are successes. Curbside organics collection across the coast, other than electoral area A, although we do have collection of organics at the Pender Harbor Transfer Station. That followed with an organics disposal ban at the Seashell landfill in 2022. The Waste Reduction Initiatives program has been ongoing since 2015. Various educational programs for reducing waste and reducing food waste, as well as the Good Samaritan program and the Backroad Trash Bash, all came out of the 2011 plan. So in terms of updating our solid waste management plan, where we're at now is that we have a consultant. We formed the Plan Technical Advisory Committee, which is a requirement that the province puts on regional districts doing plan updates. We've completed our first engagement period, which ran from May to early June. And while all that's been happening, we've been working in the background with consultant and also with Shishel Nation on those future waste disposal options. Currently, we're hoping that Shishel Nation will be either on board or not on board later this year so that we can move towards public consultation on what that next future waste disposal option might be. So this diagram on the bottom here is taken straight from the province's website and kind of gives an overview of how a solid waste management plan should work. So currently we're on step 2 there, where we're reviewing feedback and identifying proposed objectives for the plan, which we'll get into deeper in the fall of this year. So this is the primary area where the first engagement period is focused, and that is on guiding principles. So this is another provincially scripted part of the solid waste management plan where these 8 or 9 principles here are lifted almost verbatim from the province's guide for developing a solid waste management plan. We've tweaked some of the wording slightly through consultation with our Plan Technical Advisory Committee, and the first engagement period that was just completed will likely result in a few other minor changes to these. And so essentially, I'm more than happy to either receive feedback today or at some point in the near term on these guiding principles for the plan, just in case we want to tweak wording further. And as I mentioned, currently we've completed phase 1. Our consultant has just completed a draft of the What We Heard report that came into my inbox this morning. Phase 2 will be future waste disposal options engagement, either later this year or early 2024, depending on Shishel Nation. And phase 3 will be a engagement period on the draft plan itself, which will hopefully happen in mid to late 2024. And then we will hopefully get the plan adopted by the SCRD and submitted to the province in early 2025. So I'm more than happy to take any feedback or answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mark. Any questions from council? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you for that report. I'm curious as to how are the export waste off coast, like how is that calculated? Like what, can you give, is it?
Yeah, so
Thousands?
it's a challenge because those are all through contracts, both with the disposal facility, either the Roosevelt Regional Landfill in Washington or the Cache Creek Landfill, as well as whoever your barge and train shipping contractor is. We do have numbers from Catet Regional District, and right now they're charging tonnage in the range of $240 to $260 a ton for waste export, but I understand that there is still a taxation subsidization there to fully fund that system. What we have our landfill engineer working on right now is a cost-benefit analysis for the contact water pond relocation project that I mentioned that'll be in the 2024 budget at the SCRD to give us that extra 3 to 4 years of life. And part of that cost-benefit analysis is essentially a comparison to waste export versus building that project. And the preliminary numbers indicate that it's somewhere a little over twice as much expensive to do waste export from 2025 as opposed to building this contact water pond in a new location and using that space currently for landfilling. So I imagine that once we flesh out the numbers, it could easily be 2 to 3 times more expensive than what we're currently all paying for garbage disposal.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor White. Thank you for the report. One of the things that you reference in it are the recycle depots, which, as a community, and I'm going to call it an asset, I find invaluable. That you have the option of, okay, fine, it's a bit of work, you have to separate and sort the stuff, but I find it's a really value asset to the community. And I know we've got a situation here that, we may be faced with having to find a new location for it. So, I'm certainly hoping it's something that we can continue, and I think it's just something that should be expanded into other communities.
I'll just add that there's the value added as well beyond the Recycle BC programs that our recycling depot has been really strong at over a couple different incarnations, and having the electronics program, having all kinds of other programs added on to the Recycle BC, which I think to Gibsons is really, really important to continue that. Which and I know it's largely on the initiative of those operators who have to add those other programs. Councillor Kroll.
Just a follow-up to Councillor Thompson's comment about the costs of shipping waste. I also sit on the Climate Caucus, and they've had a couple of reports on the environmental impact with just fossil fuel emissions and fuel emissions and methane emissions in that whole process of transporting. So it's not just a dollar cost, it's a huge environmental cost as well.
Okay, just seeing no other questions. I think thank you for the presentation, and we do have, I guess, one other question is we do have representation on PTAC, correct? The town of Gibsons, or is that was it the PMAC that we had a staff member?
I believe it was the PMAC. Yeah, there isn't anyone from Town of Gibsons or the District of Sechelt on PTAC, even though we did send an invite. However, we did have a municipal meeting separate from PTAC in which Town of Gibsons representative did attend.
Great. Councillor Kroll?
This is more of just a personal thing. You have a slight accent that I've been trying to place.
Oh, it's South African, yeah. But I've been here since 2000, so I finished elementary school, high school here, so it's been heavily Canadianized.
So what you're hearing is a 23-year-old South African accent. Okay, thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
So next are our quarterly reports, and the first one is Planning and Development Services Department. Those are on, that report's on page 37 to 55. I think it's, we've all reviewed it, I'm sure. So I don't know if there are any updates or anything.
I have
We-
a prepared presentation,
Yeah.
unless you want.
Oh, no, I just asked for update. Is there, if there's any update or anything? Yeah, okay. Are there any questions from council? So Councillor DeAndretti.
Thank you, Mayor. My first question regards GPA 1 and 2. I see that they are in progress, but I'm just wondering if there's a timeline. And also, I don't see GPA 9 here. Does it mean that it is complete?
Thank you for the questions. So DPA 1 and 2, they're still under review. I'd have to look, I'll follow up on the timeline to complete those DPs. I can't remember the date. But I guess I could give a quick update for DPA 1. Right now, we've got high hazard, low hazard, and fill areas. We're going to be changing that to coastal flooding, ravine or creek flooding, and then steep slopes. So that's going to be changing a little bit. DPA 2, they have identified a number of creeks that were not previously identified. So they will now be protected in the new development permit area and expanded a little bit more to cover those areas. I'll double check the timeline. And then DPA 9, no, it's not complete. It's still under review. Planning is working with infrastructure on aligning the development permit area guidelines with the bylaws, the water regulation bylaw, and potentially subdivision servicing bylaw.
Any more questions? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor. Incredible amount of work that's gone on this past quarter, which I just want to take a step back to the Housing Accelerator Fund application and what will appear to be a considerable amount of work there. Can we anticipate that there would be a need for hiring in order to support the amount of work that might come through with that?
Thank you for that question, Councillor. Yes, depending on how we prioritize the work that comes out of it, we might be hiring a consultant to support on some of the work. Or, I mean, the use of the funds is so broad that it ranges from potentially hiring a consultant to do some of the work to land acquisition. So depending on how we use the funds, we would potentially hire consultants. Could be for engagement, could be we could be entering into partnerships. So yeah, it's hard to answer that right now because we haven't broken down the work to the project scope level yet. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. I guess one part of the report that I was really impressed by is the news of David Blake's great work in increasing his certification as a building official, and it was really a great asset to the town whenever any employees put time into doing upgrade work like that on their certifications, and it's very helpful. So I hope that's passed on to David. We really appreciate that. Are there any other questions, Councillor DeAndretti?
Yes, thank you. I wonder, I participated on the AT, Active Transportation meeting. Was really engaging, really exciting. And I wonder, is it the planning department able to share the community engagement framework with council? Okay, that would be lovely.
Yes, yeah. And just to follow up on that, we will be receiving a What We Heard report as well, and that can be shared with council as well. And we'll share the slide deck from the engagement or the stakeholder workshop once I receive that. I'll follow up today.
Great. Okay, well, thank you for the report. Oh, you've got one more? Okay, Councillor DeAndretti.
I'm going in order. This regards the bylaws. I just want to understand because on the bylaw enforcement, it says complaints received in the other category were related to, and then it specify 6 categories. But what will be the others? Usually there are some tables. I don't know. I missed that. I couldn't see because usually there's a breakdown. Whether it's I was trying to see the statistic on dog issues because it has been lately a hot issue, etc.
Okay, so I think I couldn't quite understand, but the question is, can we break down to the dog complaints, or?
I don't
do-
have
can-
the actual numbers for the dog complaints. They would be on the individual monthly reports. I'd have to go back and look at the 3 months and then add those up. I think it was a little lower than usual.
Oh, okay.
Okay, a little lower than usual.
No, Mayor, I think usually you provide, unless I miss here, but I couldn't find, you provide per month, right? The breakdown. But I just don't understand when you just specify, like, this quarter was a busy, 58 complaints. Complaints received in the order were related to, and then you provide 6 categories. But what are the other complaints? That's, because usually we go to the table, right? And that's,
So the other complaints are categorized by property, highway, dog, recreational water lease. And then we have this other category which sort of encompasses the more random complaints we get.
Okay, go ahead.
so is there a reason why the reports are no longer here? Because usually we have, right?
They would be in the monthly ones, which should be attached, the breakdown for the 3 months. But I'm sorry, we don't have that today.
Oh, yeah, Director.
Sorry, it looks like we did not include the monthly breakdown, so we normally include each month of the quarter, so there's 3 months that are included, and it looks like we've missed that, so I can forward that to council.
Okay. It's just because.
Thank you. Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor White. Through you, sir, to the Director of Planning, and I guess perhaps.
Well, I'll take the question and delegate it out if we need to.
I just wondered if you could give us a ballpark figure of how many licensed, permitted residential guest accommodation units we currently have operating.
I think that's in here, isn't it? Does it say 76? Is that right?
76.
76.
Correct, and we have 10 applications under review. So 38, half of those are for entire homes, and the other half are for partial homes or part-time entire homes.
Missed it, I guess. Sorry. Oh,
Councillor Thompson.
There's a reference here that it's noted a total of 72 RGAs identified prior to the regulation. How do we come up with that number? I've seen that float a fair bit. I just think it'd be really helpful for council, especially as we're moving forward and making decisions based on that comparative to pre and post. Even if there's a broad, because it's impossible to be accurate because it was not registered at that time, but it would be good if we could almost dial in on a number and use that as a reference point if everybody agreed to that.
Director.
Sure, thank you. So that number was a number we had in-house from collecting information on, the bylaw office collected all advertisements for short-term rentals. So we had a package of these 72 listings. So depending on where you take your listings and what point in time, that number can fluctuate. And some are repeated on, say, VRBO and Airbnb and Booking.com and Expedia. So what we did was we just counted all of the ones that we had known about, and that number was 72. So that was the number we started with when we did our analysis on residential guest accommodation regulation. And we don't actually know which ones were entire homes or which ones were partial homes. Because a lot of them say they're entire homes, but they might just be a room in a house that has a kitchen and an ensuite bathroom. So that piece of the data is missing. Okay.
Thanks. Councillor DeAndretti.
Thank you. What is the status of Gospel Rock?
Yes, that's on the report, where it's
Yes.
briefly mentioned, briefly listed on the final pages there, yeah.
Yeah, so they've applied, or they're renewing their subdivision application because their previous one has expired. So planning and infrastructure are working together on the preliminary layout assessment letter, which outlines the requirements to complete the subdivision. So they're planning on proceeding. Once they get their letter from the town, they're going to be working on the servicing agreements, and they're hoping to start the work soon.
Councillor DeAndretti.
Thank you. Just clarify, there was subdivisions on the lots close to Gower Point, right? Were these done? Are these complete? Also, okay, so you're talking about these ones or
I'm talking about all of them.
all of them?
Yeah.
Okay, so, thank you.
Okay. I think we're finished our questions for that report. Thank you very much for the quarterly report. And we're now moving on to Administrative, Incorporative, and Legislative Services Departments for their Q2 report, which are on. Thank you for joining us. Pages 5 to 19.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll just start recognizing that well, first of all, I wanted to recognize the staff's effort in getting these reports to council, which we're always happy when they're done, but it seems like we could use a bit more time to complete these for what it's worth. And some of for our department, we listed a few items there. Most of these items I'm speaking with council separately on it, so unless you have specific questions on strategic plan or the water summits on the project management, I'd probably refer to Rebecca, maybe just for I will comment, sorry, and just contradicting myself here, just a couple of things on these contracts and agreements. Seems to be a busy season for that, and we list some of the ones that we've completed. We've got the hockey one in the go at the moment, the junior hockey facility. Sort of highlight that, and of course, yeah, I think for now, I think I'll just leave it there as far as those pieces go. And for Rebecca, if you've got some other topics you want to cover on that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think I just wanted to emphasize that I write what was really only a piece of it, that much of, if you have questions, probably the team feels, and much of it through Manny's guidance, so it really is a team effort. And we were delighted to welcome Andrew on board and have him join our team in Q2, and that was a highlight for me as well. Because that was one of our issues that needed resolving, and I can't emphasize enough how creative our team is. With regard to the piece that Tracy has written on for records management, she knows that far better than myself. She spends most of her time digging deep into that, so it really is not just what I write, but really a group effort. So I'll do my best to answer your questions, but I might have to ask someone else.
Okay. I'll look to council to see if there are any questions. Comments. There's a lot. This is, yeah, a number of people participated in this particular report, so there's a lot of information here. I want to mention one staff member who's been doing a lot of work recently with me and council, which is Bronwyn Kent on our strategic plan, which has just been tremendous work. I've been involved in the SCRD's strategic plan process, and I'll comment generally that a lot of local governments spend a lot of external funds on strategic plans, like in the 5 figures of hiring designers and consultants, and even when they have communications departments, they do that. I can confirm that firsthand. So it's been just a really tremendous to be able to work with Bronwyn on this and have her responsiveness and professionalism, especially the turnaround's been amazing, and kind of we've had a lot of changes that we've been sending in, and Bronwyn's been very responsive and diligent and in making those changes. Councillor Thompson.
We're talking about Bronwyn, so I wanted to give a shout out because the uptick on the socials from last quarter are very impressive. Well done.
Website's looking better too. I just noticed today.
Many compliments.
Yeah. Councillor DeAndretti.
Well, yeah, I really appreciate the report. It's very informative and releases stuff from more questions, because when you read here, I really appreciate this report. With regards to the art path, it says here created permanent art piece, signage, and had them engraved on aluminum and installed by Parks, produced voices piece for the island coastal economic. So I got a little bit, I didn't understand.
The funding.
Maybe you should come to the mics, or I should have said that to Sue too, just so that we can make sure it's broadcasted to everyone in the world.
The island, the grant funders for the art path wanted article interview piece for their website called Voices, and I can't take all the credit for it because Stuart from the art gallery helped provide a lot of information, but they gave me questions that they wanted about the art path, how it's attained the goals that were set out for it. So we put together a piece and submitted that, and it's on their website. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
You have something, Councillor Kroll?
No, just to echo, I think, what everyone else has said. Probably the lack of questions is that the report is so thorough and complete, and even illustrations, which, when you're struggling down pages and pages and pages of the written word, just having that little visual break is very much appreciated. So thank you.
Yeah, especially appreciated all the reporting here on records management and technology too. I can't say I understand it all, but I'm glad it's here because it gives me confidence. Yeah. Councillor Kroll.
Just in follow-up to the comment you just made, you realize how critically important it is for records management when someone spends so much time of their day having to seek out those records to, answer FOIs and things like that, and being able to, have, hopefully in the not too distant future, be able to tap into an organized thing. Because when you do venture downstairs or into some of the hidey holes around the town, and there's boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff that, just sort of makes your hair curl. So you really appreciate the need for, getting this material digitized.
Thank you, everyone. So we're on to 4.2, Finance and Human Resources Department, Quarterly 2 report. And that report's on pages 21 to 28. And I don't know if there's anything to emphasize or see.
No, the only thing, through Mr. Mayor, is that our quarter 2 ends just before the taxation due date. So I'll just speak briefly to how tax season went this year. And so this year, what we saw was Well, first, the front desk and finance staff did an incredible job they provided a really high level of support to taxpayers, and I'm always so impressed. So kudos to them again. What they noticed this year was a lot of pre-COVID activity in terms of people coming to the counter again. We weren't expecting that. The last few years have been a lot of electronic and mailed-in payments. Now that COVID seems to be, ebbing a bit, people are going back to in-persons. They had a lot of that at the counter, which was unexpected, so we'll plan for that next year a bit better. We had, again, really good returns in terms of payments. About 93% of our taxpayers pay their taxes by the due date. That includes deferrals. Deferrals are continue to be really popular. We have about 15% of eligible properties that could do defer. It's about $1.3 million. We do get the funding quite quickly, which is good. It's about 323 properties. So, and again, about 60% of our payments come in electronically. So in the ones that were coming in over the counter, it used to be mailed, but now people want to come back and talk in person. So, anyway, so big kudos to the staff that handled it so well again this year. So, really pleased. Thank you.
Questions? Okay, no question. Oh, maybe Councillor Crowell is going to say the same thing as last time.
All I'm going to say is ditto, because Lorraine gives amazing reports. Thank you.
Infrastructure services. Try to keep the streak alive. No, we might have some questions. Sorry.
Thank you, Mayor Wade. I'll just briefly say that I would also like to acknowledge all the effort that went into the whole team contributing to this report. And it's a reflection of just the team effort that goes on within infrastructure to keep things running. And just touching on the projects that that are identified in the report, there's certainly a lot more that's going on. We had to come up with a threshold of which ones we're going to report out, or we could have 6 pages of some of the improvements that our operations are taking on at the wastewater treatment plant or with the water distribution system and other some of the administrative projects we're doing as well. And I just as well maybe would like to just share my excitement to have a project coordinator who started at the beginning of Q2. So Ryan has been here right at the beginning of Q2, and it's been great having him on board. And we also filled the chief operator position, but they haven't arrived to the coast yet. They'll be here in about a month, starting maybe mid-August. So we'll have a chief operator at the plant, which will be a huge benefit operationally. Thank you.
Great. Where's that chief operator coming from?
He's coming from Manitoba. He's been operating there and has got quite a bit of experience in wastewater operations and specifically with the type of technology that we have at the plant here. So it should be a seamless fit.
Great. And we have about 20 minutes until our next meeting, so we could fill it out by just asking Trevor question after question after question. everything you've always wanted to know about sewage treatment plants. Councillor D'Andrade.
Thank you, Mayor. This regards Chester Creek. I don't know if this is for Trevor or maybe perhaps for Manny, but I was thinking about the resolution that Council passed last year in July, which regards the conservation of watershed, of Charman Creek watershed, including the forest. So, and we got all this funding to do all the improvements, so that's awesome. But where are we with the conservation? Can you recall? 'Cause
That's probably a CAO question.
So I was going to say you're looking at it because the conservation is we passed through conservation, moving right into a restoration process. I think at that time, we knew very little about that area and the work that went back to Dave Bates, which justified the funding that we got. Sort of in terms of what we needed to know from that, it's pretty obvious as far as the value of the site. There's a couple other sort of components to that decision of council that you referenced, which was around the form of land designation. That's the part that the legal protection, although right now it's legally owned by the town of Gibsons and it's not necessarily at risk of a loss, but it has a complex set of, complex meaning of a variety of land uses there are happening there, including habitat services, which are very valuable, but it's also where we have our treatment plant. It's what carries the bulk. That's the most active drainage corridor that we have, the community has, and so it's very important that it functions well. There's obviously water lines crossing that area. And I think right now we have no immediate or near future, we're not aware of any application that would put that land at risk of being used for something else. I think that portion about a report around just ascertaining the land uses, that's on our list somewhere. We just haven't sort of made it to the top. And to be honest, the success of getting the grant has caused us to spend a lot of our time on that side. And I want to somewhat relatedly mention that I was counting, the sort of the dark side of getting money. And Councillor Kroll sent me a piece for a link to a grant, and I start to cringe a little bit when I see those. And the reason is that for every grant, for every action, there's a reaction. Our reaction is that we have to write quarterly reports for everyone, and we're pushing 20 of these grants. And, it's our busiest people that have to fill them up. So you do the application, you do the work, and do the reporting. And in the last quarter, and Lorraine can maybe comment about that, we've been a little bit cut up, not cut up, not in a good sense, but, we've had to ask for extensions, for example, because we can barely keep up with the reporting, to be honest. And that's a real concern for us. So not to sort of get away from your original question, but so there's lots happening there, but we haven't addressed the land use piece. And Michelle, she's here to continue that. No, just joking.
Just continue. Yeah. Were you watching? And yeah, I figured. Councillor DeAndrade.
Yeah, thanks for the answer. And Mayor, just a clarification, I'm not concerned with any immediate issue.
Okay.
And I'm totally aware of the incredible work that the town, my concern in protecting it's in the future, because, right now we have a lot of sympathy for that. But who knows, in 10 years, we don't know. And that's where I am. So it's not an immediate concern. It's just like, how can we structure in a way that we can have peace of mind that if in the future council decides to redevelop the area, I don't know, or something, there's more barriers, and that's my concern.
Other questions, Councillor Kroll?
A partial follow-up to what Councillor Andrade was just asking. I'm assuming, considering we have the funding in place to do some restoration work on this stream, that it would make more sense to do the restoration work and then protect it, rather than put a protection in place that might be an obstacle to future restoration. Is there any logic in that?
I'm familiar with another local government that has that issue. The provincial park at the SCRD, obvious one, yeah. CAO?
It would depend on the form of protection, but sometimes we can sort of create a situation we ourselves can't even use. So let's say if we had a problem with the sewer line and we had to do works in that area, then we had a park that required consultation or different type. We're not always going to be in a position to sort of avoid doing some work, and hopefully that won't happen. But that's the type of example of what could happen.
Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor White. Just going back 5 years now, I guess, the original proposed affordable housing was in that ravine, in that wooded area. Well, it wasn't in the ravine, but it was, no, I said in the wooded area. And I'm assuming that, if we were going to be protecting that ecosystem per se, that we would endeavor to protect the tree canopy and the forest that we have in place. But it also, there's a difficult sort of question dangling there about developable property when you're dealing with a small footprint of a town. So that's just an overarching concern I'm raising at this point, just to keep in the background of people's minds.
It's an interesting hypothetical discussion to have as a council in the future, but I don't know if it's really
no, I'm just
related to the quarterly
putting it
report,
out there just to keep it on people's radar. And just a follow-up to what CAO was mentioning about a grant application. In the particular case of that, the amount that was involved, if it was being applied for, fine, but it wasn't a significant amount considering the amount of work in getting it. And the fact it was so prescriptive as what you did with it, it was sort of limiting. So, your comment sort of definitely makes sense.
Speaking of the grant, I may as well ask this question now, because it's on this report too, about the culvert replacement that we're also looking at later. Now there was a mention that as an option, like we could wait and package that with other parts of the grant, but it wasn't recommended. But I just wanted to confirm that the grant still pays for this project though too, because that wasn't clear. I just wanted to confirm that.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. I think I tried to highlight that in the discussion section, but maybe I did make it explicitly clear that yes, even though if it's not part of the rest of the work, it's still funded through that grant.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Thompson next for this one, yeah. And then Councillor DeAndretti.
Thank you. The data collection around the difference in rainfall effect on the 5 different installed locations was very interesting. We have some time. I'd love to hear more about that. And what interested me was with the high and low precipitation, what period of time would you anticipate needing to be able to have sort of an effective understanding of what those effects might be? Because I'm still hung up on the whole 1 drop 9 years. Yeah. It's all such very interesting information.
I actually don't come to committee meetings very often, so I don't know the protocol. So if I talk at a turn.
Right now.
Okay, thanks.
I didn't nod my head to you.
Okay. I don't really know the answer to that question about how long would we have to track that data to have an understanding, because I think that I mentioned in the report that if we see this trend happening year after year, then that's something that we need to be aware of. And I found it really interesting because like I said, that in the past, we were looking at data from Langdale, which is so vastly different than the data from Seashelt. And we know that there's areas of high potential for infiltration for the aquifer within the watershed here. And so to be able to put those stations in areas where, like to track where the most amount of precipitation is going, and then kind of like overlaying that over top of like soil infiltration properties and seeing so it's kind of like the beginning of the data collection and the beginning of that story, but it's something like, it's like saying when was the best time to plant a tree 30 years ago? Same thing with data collection, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's also very interesting.
Yeah, it is.
The Director of Infrastructure?
Yeah, if I may add to that, I think some of the fascinating data that we'll get out of this too is the variability and how much precipitation we're seeing at lower elevations versus higher elevations and how that will fluctuate seasonally. I know that from my time previously at the regional district, throughout the wet months, fall, winter, into the early spring, there's a marked difference between the amounts of precipitation that you would receive at the Chapman Water Treatment Plant, which is an elevation of about 120, 130 meters, versus Chapman Lake, which is inland at about 975 meters. In the summer, that would often flip. So you could get in the winter, you could get 20 mils of rain in Seashell, and you could get 180 at the lake. And in the summer, often this rain that we received here, we get 15 millimeters in Gibsons. It's possible that there was trace amounts at the lake. And I think it just has to do with a whole bunch of complex atmospheric conditions that tend to, in the summer months, make the precipitation evacuate as soon as it hits dry land. And so I think it'll be interesting for us to start to track and notice that pattern between the lower elevations and the higher elevations, and presumably that will help us to get a better understanding of the recharge and seasonal fluctuations and what impacts there might be if we're getting more precipitation concentrated in the winter versus in the summer where it's distributed at different areas. So I'm just very excited to see this kind of coming forward and what we can gain from it.
Exceptional work. Yeah, well done.
Councillor D'Andrade next.
On that line of water, with regards to the wells, there's a difference, I mean, of the amount of water extracted for each well depending on the months. So what leads that? It's just an operational decision. I don't know. Is this a level of water that is deciding or something else? I'm just trying to have a sense.
Thank you for the question. I'm just parsing the data myself here right now. So I think that operationally, depending on efficiencies and runtime on the pumps and stuff like that, our operators do will rotate kind of which pump or which well is producing more kind of from month to month. There's also issues that may come up with maintenance. So a well might go down for a period of, a week to do some maintenance, or 2 weeks. I know that we were having some troubleshooting issues with the pump motor at well 3. So during that period of time, we would have been running it less. Now that well 6 has just come into operation as well, we'll start using that one more and just finding operational efficiencies and being able to balance the wells. Keeping in mind the instantaneous output restrictions that we've got in the license, and also just the operational needs and efficiencies. So it's certainly a bit of a balancing act. And now that we have this well 6 and we get more information about how it will kind of feed in and operating costs of that one versus pumping water through School Road to get up to Upper Gibsons, it'll probably take us a couple of years really to really dial in the efficient balancing of all of our wells.
Thank you.
Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor White. Something you alluded to, Trevor, is I thought we have a water license and we're allowed so much, or is a license per well?
To Mr. Mayor, so there is a single license in town. I believe that each of the well will have a limit on what the instantaneous output is from it. So like a sustainable yield. Again, I'd have to confirm that through our licenses, but I believe we have one license for the total volume annually, but I believe each well would have an instantaneous, whether it be liters per second or cubic meters per day.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Natural.
So as far as licensing, the licenses pertain to all of what we call the diversion points within the town, so all of the wells in operation. Those were the past licenses that we're still operating under. And then one of the new licenses that we got just pertained to well 6. And the consideration when we're pumping from well 6 is, like what Director of Infrastructure was saying, is that there's a sustainable yield. So when we do our pump tests, before wells come online, or I'm not sure how often they do them, then that volume is considered the sustainable yield of that well itself, and that's attached to the license, or that's a consideration of when they approve those licenses. So even though we know that the capacity of well 6 is great, we still have to operate, number one, within our available annual limits, but also within that sustainable yield, like pumping volume of that well itself. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay.
Thank you for the clarification.
Councillor D'Andrade.
Thank you. This regards the treatment of knotweed at multiple locations. So I'm curious if it's just in public land, and if there's any work. I know there was a concern brought years ago with knotweed, and we all know the issues with knotweed in town. I'm still waiting for the bylaw, but yeah.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. It is just in public facilities. So public land, or land that's owned by the town. We don't treat knotweed on private property.
CAO.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just further to that, we, from a private land perspective, on the Gospel Rock site, the protected lands, which are private, as you know, we've been in touch with Sunshine Coast Conservation Association about working with them on invasive removal, because it's a large parcel, and we mentioned our interest in identifying a sustainable method of disposing of that material, and coordinating the indication and the timing of it. So that will be one of our first tests on a larger type project, depending on the timing of things. And I think hopefully as soon as we can, we'll also look at that bylaw for the rest. But I think until we really have the disposal, we don't want to encourage people to load up their cars or whatever they're going to do with it. It only to say, oh, there's no place for you to take it, by the way. So that's continues to be a big barrier. And of course, Mark was here. We've reached out to them as well on that topic.
This is it's interesting that the CEO has mentioned this, because that was my understanding. That's why at the moment I was really concerned. I don't want to pass this by law before we have an incinerator, because I thought at the time the incinerator was the only safe thing to do with knotweed. But there has been other methods, which is really packing them in bags and leaving them forever in a bag or maybe in the sun. Because when I spoke with the CRD recently, they really said, we don't have the capacity even to look at invasive species right now. But also, this has changed, so perhaps it's time that we go ahead with, obviously we'll have to do some education, but because there's knotweed in town, among others, which are the Scotch broom, which is pretty easy to eradicate, and we have not done too much. So,
Thank you, Councillor DeAndrade. And I think with that, we're concluding our quarterly reports. And our next meeting is of the Committee of the Whole will be Tuesday, September 5th, 2023 at 3 p.m. And I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Thompson, Councillor Kroll, all those in favor? The motion's carried. And we'll take a couple minutes break.